Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Shanalytics. Today is not going to be such a 49ers focused episode of Shanalytics because we have Blake and Vish from Blake and Vish Sports on today. Of course, Blake, you're a huge Packers fan, and Vish, everybody knows you from your 49ers streams, of course. How are you guys doing right now? It's kind of a lull in the NFL offseason, so it doesn't seem like there's a ton to talk about at the moment.
Yeah, we're just kind of going through it. The lull is very much real. I'm surprised you've been rattling off stream after stream the past couple of weeks because I call up Blake and I go, "Yo, we need to stream at some point." And he's like, "Man, what should we talk about?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It's crazy, but you, Grant, few people just seem to be grinding content out there. So big props to all of you guys for getting it out right now."
Yeah, definitely. I'm with Vish on that one. It's kind of tough with the offseason, but Packers have kept it pretty interesting. So I can't complain. Gotta love the Adam Schefter and Rob Domofsky bombs. But besides that, just reading the Jordan Love news is always pretty fun because it's always, either he's missing everything or the coaches were fanning him off because he was performing too well. So I don't know if that's him being good or the defense being bad, but I'll just take it as Jordan Love's going to be good.
And just real quick before we get into everything for everybody, Blake and Vish's stuff is all linked in the description below. You can go check out their YouTube channel, Vish's Twitter, and their Gmail if you guys want to hit them up for anything. I do want to get into our first topic, though, and you kind of brought that up perfectly, Blake. Let's talk about Aaron Rodgers because I don't think anyone's really been talking about him at all this offseason. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I might be missing something, but so for you, in the 2021 season, Blake, and we'll start with you and then I'll go to you, Vish, after Blake. Do you think that this is going to be Aaron Rodgers' last season with the Packers?
I do. And it's weird because this is actually kind of how I expected it to play out. I thought this would be Rodgers last year, like this 2021 year, and I thought, they'd have Love sit for a year or two, similar to how Rodgers sat for a few years, and then put Love in. And the main reason for that was mainly the cap space issue. And I know a lot of people were like, he's going to get traded before June 1st. He's getting traded on the draft and whatnot. But if you just look at the financial situation of it, because that's what I think a lot of people don't always take into account. And they're like, oh, he's getting traded here or there. If he got traded before June 1st, his dead cap would have been $31.5 million. Now, I think this roster is pretty solid. Obviously Aaron Rodgers covers up for a few of the deficiencies, but there's still a lot of good players on the team. And if you're having someone who's getting paid $31 million to go win on another team, yeah, your roster or team is probably not going to be as good as it could be. And I just don't think they would do that. And there's definitely obviously turmoil with Rodgers and then someone in the front office, whether that's Gutekunst, Mark Murphy. I don't think it's Jordan Love. He said he likes Jordan Love. He maybe isn't happy they took him, but he doesn't hate Love. So yeah, I do think this is his last season. And just for frame of reference, if he gets traded before June 1st, this year it'll be 17 million dead. And then if it's post, it'll be 14 dead. So that's what I'm anticipating to happen. And I think that's kind of the key number is just the amount of dead cap that would be on the books because of Rodgers.
Yeah, I think Blake summed that up perfectly. I don't have much of a major disagreement. I do think this is his last year. And, obviously, there's the Rodgers conflict that most people are framing it as that's why it's his last year. But I think it was also the Packers' plan all along, as Blake said. Clearly, Jordan Love was a project when they drafted him. So clearly they wanted to sit him 2 years and eventually move on with him. Because I think the other big thing, Blake touched on the cap, one of the biggest impediments for the Green Bay Packers to totally stack their rosters over the last 3-4 years has been Aaron Rodgers' contract. When you're paying a quarterback that much money, even if he's Aaron Rodgers, it's really difficult to win when Patrick Mahomes is on a rookie contract. Lamar Jackson's on a rookie contract. Tom Brady's taking 15, 20 less million dollars than Aaron Rodgers. So when you factor in all of those things, I think one of the big decisions on why the Packers traded up for Jordan Love, it's not just that they've had this standard of going from Favre to Rodgers to now Jordan Love, where you have three superiorly physically gifted quarterbacks. Obviously, Love isn't as gifted as Favre Rodgers, but he's pretty physically gifted. But obviously, there's a lot to polish with his game. So we'll see if he does that. We haven't gotten to see him in 2 years. I think the big thing is they realize that the rookie wage scale is where you need to win with your quarterback. And even though Green Bay is a conservative franchise in terms of their spending with free agency, though Gutekunst has kind of changed that, I think what they do want to do is load up their roster in terms of depth and assets so that they can build a stacked team for Jordan Love, who could succeed for them more than Aaron Rodgers because the team is better. So I think from that standpoint, I kind of rambled a little bit, but I think the bottom line is Green Bay wanted a quarterback on a rookie contract. That's why they drafted Jordan Love. And that's why I think regardless of whether there is this beef or not, I think that both sides want to part ways after this year.
Yeah, and I think for me, the beef that you're bringing up, I don't even think it's the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers beef. I think the thing Packers fans, like Blake would tell you, like you just told us, have to be worried about is Rodgers versus the front office specifically. And this is the kind of thing where sometimes, and I've heard this before, so I'm not going to pretend like it's an original take, but you worry about the Packers not having an owner because then you come up with these types of situations where it would be really helpful to have a person at the top who makes more money than the starting quarterback on your team and is writing the paychecks, right? But with the Packers' unusual structure and the way the team works, it can make it harder at times to keep a guy like Aaron Rodgers who might be demanding to get out. And I think the other thing, and Vish, like you guys nailed this part of it, the financials. I was going to bring a lot of that up. The one thing I do want to point out with that, though, and I think you guys hit almost all of it with that, but the one thing is that for Jordan Love, they can accept his fifth-year option after the third season of his rookie deal, which would be after the 2022 season. So it creates a timeline where the Packers have to see him play at some point in that season. So to me, that makes it obvious that if last year wasn't Aaron Rodgers last year with the Packers, then this upcoming year has to be the last year. And even looking at the financials, Blake, I'm sure you know this very well as a Packers fan, they have an out for Rodgers next offseason between 2022 or between 2021 and 2022 to where they can get off that contract. And I think save something like $23 million. Yeah. So I think this has to be Aaron Rodgers last season. I just don't see any other way around it unless he's going to take a major restructure or they, like going back to what Vish was saying, unless they just decide that they don't believe in the rookie wage scale anymore. I mean, which I don't see changing because based on the way the Packers have been spending and building their team, like you smartly pointed out, Vish, they're more aggressive in free agency than they ever have been. So getting a guy like Love, you can be really successful and you can put a really great team around him. I mean, I know you guys have hammered this home with the Browns, for example. They have Baker Mayfield. They're able to put an elite team around Baker Mayfield, right? So it could be that same type of situation with that. I do want to move on to the next topic we were going to cover, though, unless you guys have anything else to add with that.
I had one more thing, and I know one of Rodgers' beefs is maybe not having enough like influence on the personnel of the team. And one of the reports was that when Jake Kumaran, who was like the sixth receiver on the Packers depth chart, Rodgers was a big fan of him. He praised him a ton. And it was the day after he praised him that he got cut. And that really irked Rodgers because, he was a big fan and liked how Kumaran was playing. And, if all they had to do was say, hey, Rodgers, do you want to keep him around? And that would have made him more happy. I don't think that's too big of an ask. And I think that's something that just further shows that Rodgers just wants a little more say in the personnel and, maybe ask about the draft picks, ask about free agents they are thinking of acquiring, and just trying to keep him happy overall, I think is kind of the only way to amend, I guess, the relationship. But, we'll see if that happens. I don't know if I'm too convinced on it because it doesn't seem like it's headed that way, but I can be hopeful.
Hey, and with all of Aaron Rodgers' Jeopardy money, he can pay those fines right off now.
Yeah,
so he should be fine this offseason financially. Next thing I wanted to get to, and we can start with you, Vish, for this topic, and then go to Blake. Looking at the two teams that we're all huge fans of, right? The Packers, the 49ers, they're the class of the NFC right now. So do you think as their rosters are currently constructed that these are Super Bowl contending type teams?
Yeah, I think they are Super Bowl contending teams, but I think both teams have clear impediments that put them more on the outside looking in. If you had to ask me the four biggest Super Bowl contenders right now in the NFL, I would go with the Browns, the Bills, the Buccaneers, and the Chiefs. To me, those are the four best teams in the NFL. Those are the four most complete teams and I think the two most complete teams are the Bucs and the Browns. And then the Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs have these two amazing quarterbacks who really can overcome a lot. I would say the Packers fall in the same boat, but I think they have a couple more holes in their roster, namely their interior defensive line and the lack of speed at linebacker. This is something we've discussed ad nauseum, and it continues to be an issue. I still think there's a lack of an explosive element on the Packers offense. I think that they're too reliant on Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Rodgers' offensive execution. I think Aaron Jones is the only explosive player on their offense. I wish they had a number two receiver that could take the top off of defense. I think Amari Rodgers is just another in between the numbers. He is more explosive than I give him credit for, but I kind of like him to like a Sterling Shepard, maybe a better version of that coming out of college, a Randall Cobb type. I wish the Packers had a pure speed guy, a guy that can score an 80-yard touchdown where you go hard play action and you can go bombs away because Rodgers can still get it out there. So those are the things I think they're missing, and I think those things would hurt them when they play a team like the Buccaneers. As we saw, it had to be a little perfect, and the Buccaneers corners got a little grabby, and the Packers offense struggled to execute because guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Equanimeous St. Brown cannot beat true man coverage consistently enough for them. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to the Niners, I still think there's big question marks at corner depth, and I still think that their edge rushing depth in general is a big question mark. I think they're still so overly reliant on Nick Bosa and Nick Bosa's production. I like Samson Ebukam. He is not a natural or a true pass rusher, and he cannot even be relied upon, in my opinion, for carry height or production if Nick Bosa goes down. D Ford, obviously fantastic player when he's healthy, still a question mark. So I think there's some question marks there with the Niners. And then with the Niners, the other thing is the number 3 receiver is still a question mark. And I still question the entire drop back passing game of the 49ers. I still don't think they're a team that's built to drop back. I look at their personnel. They don't have the receivers to me to drop back. Their offensive line, while it's improved, I still think Blake and Tomlinson and Mike McGlinchey are not the pass blockers that you can drop back 35, 40 times a game. They're still very good players in their own right. They're good at certain things. True drop back pass protection is not something they truly excel at. And then finally, Jimmy Garoppolo has shown that when it comes to the drop back pass game and that when he's asked to do that away from play action, that is something he has not done well as a 49er. And Trey Lance, this is something he didn't do in college. He wasn't a true drop back pass quarterback in college. So while that's a skill set he could possibly develop, and you see glimpses of his ability to process information, make quick, decisive reads based on safety rotations, and you see his ability to do, and you see the arm strength to make throws at every level. It's just something you don't get to see consistently. So to have an expectation for him to do that next year would be so totally unfair. So from that standpoint, I think both teams have enough talent to definitely compete and be teams that would be right there in the conversation and definitely make the playoffs. But I think there are giant question marks that need to be answered before we can say that these are amongst the 4 aforementioned teams that I named, who I believe are the true 4 Super Bowl favorites.
Yeah, I'm with Vish on the top 4 teams. I think you mentioned Browns, Chiefs, Bills, and Buccaneers. I'm right there with you. I think those rosters and the combination of rosters and like not having many weaknesses, along with all those teams, have some great quarterback play, and then others who I'd say really good, like the Browns. I don't think Baker's as good as those other guys, but he's still more than capable, and the roster's maybe a little better. So I think those rosters are clearly a notch or 2 above, say, even the Packers. And, the Packers made the NFC Championship game the last two years, and that's still with, I think Vish hit it perfectly, the big holes they have, the consistent number 2 receiver, the interior D-line still not having really much talent besides Kenny Clark. The linebackers, they've neglected since, I want to say, Desmond Bishop probably, depending on how you think of Blake Martinez. And although they did I really like their draft, and I think they filled up some holes. Like their O-line still has questions. Bakhtiari's coming back from injury. They lost Lindsley. If Elton Jenkins or Billy Turner gets injured, that would be a major loss. And that's the thing that I have with the Packers and the Niners, is that if they have a couple injuries to a few key positions, like their season is out the window. Now, last year the Niners had key injuries to, I think you could say, every single position besides kicker, maybe punter and long snapper. And I wouldn't be surprised if those guys were on the injury report a couple weeks. But the thing here is that if the Packers have, say, Rodgers go down, or the Niners have one or two of their secondary guys go down, I'd be very concerned with the lack of depth at those positions. And, you could probably say that for every team, but with teams that have championship aspirations, I think depth is really, really going to be important, especially with an added game this year that, is just going to add more wear and tear to the body. So we'll see. I think Packers will make the playoffs. I'm not too concerned with the division. It seems like LaFleur's done a good job as a coach there, and obviously Rodgers is Rodgers against these teams. But it's going to be improved. And then for the Niners, I don't know about their quarterback play yet. We still don't know what Trey Lance is going to be, and that's just too big of an unknown. I think they can make the playoffs, but I think the NFC West is probably the toughest division in all of the NFL. Like, I could see any of those teams being first and any of those teams being last. And it's hard to say that about many other divisions. I'd say the next closest would maybe be like the AFC North, because I like all those teams a lot. But the NFC West could legitimately have 3 playoff teams, and it could be any 3 of them, and I wouldn't be surprised with whoever made it.
I think for me, just starting with the Packers, I'm a huge Aaron Rodgers fan. I'm not going to hide that. He's my favorite quarterback, maybe ever. So I think any year Aaron Rodgers is on your team, especially coming off an MVP year, you're going to be in the playoffs. You're going to be competitive. You're going to have a chance to compete with the best of the NFC. And I think if you're looking at, and we'll get to this topic a little later with the NFC, but if you just look at the NFC top to bottom, the Buccaneers are great, but then beyond that, I think there's a real question of who those next 2 to 5 to 6 teams are, right? And the Packers, to me, while I don't think their roster is going to wow you between all those teams, they don't really stand apart in any sort of way like that. And like you greatly pointed out, Vish and Blake, they do have holes in the roster. They have issues where if they get one injury here or there, could be a season-ending type of thing for the team. So I think with the Packers, it's really dependent on Aaron Rodgers, how this team is humming this year, and their depth, and whether or not they have injuries to their depth. I mean, you guys nailed this topic, really. But for the 49ers specifically, the one thing I'm looking at, and Vish, you mentioned it, and I almost started going off while you were talking about it, but I had to hold myself back. If Jason Verrett gets hurt, season over for the 49ers. I don't really know what else to tell 49ers fans, because their starting corner will be Emmanuel Mosley, and then they'll have to decide between Ambry Thomas and Deontay Johnson and all these other guys who you just don't want to put in that kind of position. So to me, when I look up and down the Niners roster, I think Blake put it perfectly that they're going to make the playoffs this year. I think they'll definitely be very competitive in that sense. But if I'm looking at the Super Bowl window for this team, I would say it's about the next 2 to 4 years, not this upcoming year, right? I think with Trey Lance, I want to see him play as soon as possible and be successful early on. And I think if he can get a playoff game under his belt in his rookie year, to me, that would be super important for his development as a quarterback and being successful in the NFL with the 49ers. So I don't think either of these teams are going to win the Super Bowl this year, but I think, like you guys perfectly pointed out, they're in that tier of teams who should be competing for the NFC Championship games, the wild card, divisional round type stuff, to where you could see the Niners winning a game or 2 in the playoffs. You could see the Packers getting to the NFC Championship game, but I don't think any of us are predicting them to go to the Super Bowl.
Right. And just to kind of sum it up, I think one thing you touched on is how the 2 through 5 in the NFC is open. I think outside of the Bucs, there's major question marks with every single team. Like the Saints could be that team, but there's major question marks at the quarterback position. The Seahawks could be that team. Well, there's major question marks with their defensive line. There's major question marks at the cornerback position. The Rams could be that team. There is question marks at their linebacker position and just in general, just how they're going to cope with the loss of like a John Johnson and all of that. So there's question marks. The Niners, we just went over it. The Packers, we just went over it. So there's large question marks with every single one of these teams, which is why, to me, the winner of the 2021-22 Super Bowl, to me, it looks like it'll come out of the AFC.
Mm-hmm.
I really agree with that. I think the thing to me that stands out is the AFC is so top heavy compared to recent years. I mean, really, I think like you guys perfectly mentioned, there are 3, maybe even 4 teams, right, who are all at the top. And I think it's pretty clear who they are. And at the end of the year, I don't think there will be any surprises there for those top of the top teams. The next thing real quick, Vish. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that this has changed over the last couple of years, but the AFC is just better than the NFC now. When you go down the AFC's depth, when you go with teams like the Colts, they're in this same exact tier. Tennessee is right around this tier. I mean, Baltimore, we didn't even mention them. They're there.
No.
Pittsburgh has a defense that when they're healthy, they're as good as anybody in the NFL, so they'll be in this conversation. Miami is really talented. I mean, you just go down the list. New England's going to be back, in my opinion. I think their roster is loaded, and they're built to play a style of football the AFC is not ready to handle. So if you go down the list, to me, the AFC is stacked. It is much better than the NFC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the AFC is really stacked, and that kind of perfectly leads me into the next topic because we were already kind of talking about this. So let's get into it. After Tampa, for you, who do you think is going to be that next team in the NFC?
Vish,
yeah, Vish.
I'll take it. I'll take it first. I think it'll be the Rams.
Okay.
With the Rams, I just look first. I'm confident in their coaching staff. I believe in Sean McVay. I believe in Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is who I wanted the Niners to hire to replace Robert Saleh. I believe in what he did schematically at the end of last season with the Atlanta Falcons on defense. I thought he was way more creative than Dan Quinn ever was. So first, I believe in their coaching staff. Then I believe in their quarterback. Everybody knows how I feel about Matthew Stafford. I think he's a big-time quarterback that's a perfect fit for their system. I think they have a solid offensive line, obviously a great play caller in Sean McVay. They have a good running game. Blake and I are huge Cam Akers fans, and we're really bullish on where his future is going to be.
And then you look at I'm an FSU guy. I love Cam Akers, man. I'm all about Cam Akers.
He's a stud.
He is a freaking stud.
Yeah, and then you look at their defense, and I understand that they lost Michael Brockers and a John Johnson. I think the Brockers loss is a little overstated. They replaced him, to me, quite comfortably with Ashawn Robinson. John Johnson is a big loss. He's a top 5, 6, 7 safety in the NFL. He is an absolute baller. But I think when you have a secondary with Jalen Ramsey, there are things you can do to schematically help your other safeties out because you have one guy who takes away half the field and can lock up any receiver in the NFL. Obviously, we know the impact Aaron Donald has. Leonard Floyd went from looking like a major bust in Chicago to having 10 sacks last year. That's a testament to how special Aaron Donald is, and he dominates every game in and game out. I still think there are question marks where you would like to see some improvements with the Rams. But when you go top to bottom, I look at who their coaches are. I look at who their quarterback is. I look at the consistency of how they've been winning in the NFC West and in the NFC in general the last 4 years with Jared Goff. I think the Rams are the second best team in the NFC.
And I think just real quick, just the only issue I think that with the Rams is the question of depth on that team right now. I think that's the biggest question surrounding that team by far. But Blake, for you, who do you think is that team after Tampa in the NFC?
Yeah, I was on the fence about this one. I like the Rams a lot. They were one of my teams. I love the Stafford pickup, but for me, I'm going with the team that finished first in the NFC last year, and that's the Packers. Now, I look at the teams that made the playoffs, and I look at the top teams, and I don't know. For me, like the Seahawks are, I don't know. I don't trust the Seahawks in any way. I know regular season they're gonna probably kill it, but the NFC West, I just have a tough time putting one of those teams as second because I could see that division going any way with the rankings. Maybe besides the Cardinals being the first team, I don't think they'll be the first, but the other 3 teams I could see being the first. And I look at the divisions, and I'm not completely sold on the Bears and Lions. I like the Vikings a lot, but I'd have the Packers comfortably above them. I don't think any NFC East teams there. Buccaneers we mentioned from the NFC South, but the Saints have way too many question marks at quarterback, although they could be good. And then the NFC West is a bloodbath, though. So I think with schedule, and then the Packers didn't really lose too many pieces. They lost a little depth, like with Kirksey, with Ricky Wagner and guys along those lines. But overall, it's not like any of the major parts are missing. And then one thing again, too, is LaFleur is still there and in his 3rd season. And so far, you can't really complain with the results that he's had. Now, yeah, he's had Aaron Rodgers and a pretty good roster, but it's a huge upgrade from what McCarthy was doing. And here's the other thing with the Rams, Vish, that was not mentioned. But the Staley loss, the DC gone, he was incredible last year. And I don't know if he's going to be, or I think you said Raheem Morris, right, is the DC. Now, he could be every bit as good as who they had, but I don't know, because what he did was incredible.
So I'll say this right now. I think Staley is a big loss. I don't think schematically Raheem Morris is going to be as good as Staley. Staley was wildly creative last year.
Yeah.
He was doing some special things. But I think Raheem Morris is good enough when you have Aaron Donald and you have Jalen Ramsey. It's still going to be a really, really good defense. Maybe it won't be the same special defense that carried them last year, but it won't have to be because I think they'll be a better offensive football team with Matthew Stafford under center.
Fair enough.
And for me, that kind of takes me perfectly right to where I wanted to go, Vish, which is I picked the Rams too. And I'm not just trying to agree with you, Vish. We seem to be agreeing a lot. But with the Rams, I look at them and they're one of the only teams in the playoffs that you could argue significantly upgraded at key spots where they needed to, right? I think with the team like the Saints, they're getting worse at their quarterback position pretty much no matter what. Now, hey, like I said, I'm an FSU guy. Jameis, he has a perfect passer rating in the playoffs. Might be only one pass. But no, seriously, if you look up and down the NFC, there are all these teams that I have so many question marks about. The 49ers, of course, are one of those teams, but they weren't even in the playoffs last year. I don't feel like the Seahawks necessarily got any better, like you guys covered already. And with the Packers, they did lose some of that depth on their offensive line. So I think the Rams, to me, just looking at the NFC as a whole, the difference between Jared Goff and Matt Stafford, it's going to be enormous. And I think that is the kind of thing that where they might have lost some depth on their team on defense, especially. It's not going to matter as much when you upgrade at the quarterback position like they did. And Vish, you also covered this perfectly with the Rams defense. Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald make life so much easier for the other 9 guys on the field. I mean, more than any other team in the NFL, they simplified the job of all those other players on their defense. So I think with all of that, and like you said, Vish, I mean, I really do believe in Raheem Morris too. Brandon Staley, I'm a huge fan of, but going from one defensive coordinator to another, like even the 49ers did this offseason, I think they're about in as good a position as anyone who did that. So just looking up and down the roster at the star power they have, that's a team I'm terrified of. And I think they're seriously going to win at least 11 games, if not 12 or 13 this season.
Yeah, and honestly, I think people, when they look at that roster, they look at some of the depth issues and all of that. I don't think people realize, Blake hates this word, but the gravity that both Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey create. Like, honestly, the only thing I can compare it to is having Ray Lewis and Ed Reed on the same defense. They have the 2 best defensive players in the NFL playing on the same defense. That makes it very easy for the other guys on there. Now, they don't have their Terrell Suggs, but there's a lot of really good players that came through Baltimore in defense that we thought were a lot better than they actually were because they played with those guys. So I think that's the impact. And I don't want to be positive about the Rams. Obviously, I'm a Niners fan, but if you objectively look at it, when you have those 2 guys, it's very difficult to not have an excellent defense because those 2 guys are future Hall of Famers for sure.
Yeah, and with Sean McVay, like I believe in that guy. So I think he's going to do really well. And because of that, I think the Rams are going to do really well. So 49ers fans, they might feel a certain way about that, but I don't know what to tell you guys. The last topic I want to get to before we get out of here, we'll make this really quick. So Vish, you just let me know whatever you need to, if you need to go or anything like that. And we'll start with Blake on this one. For you guys, what do you think is more important for defense's success in the NFL? Coverage or pressure on the passer?
So for me, and I haven't studied this, I guess, like I don't have an exact science here, but I've always been more of a pressure guy, and I guess a few reasons. One is just the traumatic experience of watching Aaron Rodgers and I guess the whole 2011 playoffs, and watching what the Giants defensive line with 4 guys did was just unbelievable. And, I could name a defense every year that I would watch, and all they would do is just send 4 guys. And it doesn't, obviously it matters a little bit who's back there, but if you throw 4 guys and they can consistently get pressure with just them 4, that makes the back end so much easier. And I think all the good defenses or legendary defenses of the 2010s have had that, and they've carried games. I think the 2015 Broncos is the example here. You look at that offense, and they didn't really do much in the Super Bowl, but Von Miller scored a touchdown himself. They forced multiple fumbles, played outstanding, and it was because they had Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware coming off the edges, Malik Jackson and Derek Wolfe playing incredible and just pushing the pocket back. And when the quarterback only has a few seconds and they can't go anywhere, and they're it doesn't even matter if they're mobile because the whole pocket's just collapsing. And I think it helps the coverage a lot in the sense that they have less time to cover. Now the opposite's true with coverage. If you have a great secondary and linebackers, you can help the pressure get there. But I've always been more of just pressure hurts the quarterback more, I guess, than a really tough coverage.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'd go pressure 100%, and I think it's not. I think pressure would win by. If you asked anybody this question 10 years ago, I think pressure would win by far. I think now it's becoming more of a debate, but I still think it's pressure. Blake named a lot of examples, right? You can even look at the 2012 Seahawks or 2013 Seahawks, the Legion of Boom. Everybody wants to talk about the Legion of Boom and Bobby Wagner, but that defense started up front. Michael Bennett was one of the 5 or 6 best defensive linemen in the NFL at that time. Chris Averill was a dominant defensive lineman. Those guys, their defense started up front. And, I think that when it comes to drafting and stuff and all of that, I think kind of where this question is heading in terms of roster building, I do think coverage is very important. I think a cornerback is one of the 4 premium positions in the NFL. I would just value a great edge rusher and a great pass rusher first. And what it comes down to, honestly, for me, is that if you have a great pass rush, you can protect both your corners. A great corner cannot protect a mediocre pass rush because you can only guard one side of the field. A great pass rusher, like if you have Nick Bosa and 2 mediocre corners, if Nick Bosa gets pressure, both those corners are protected. If you have Jalen Ramsey and the Titans defensive line minus Jeffrey Simmons from last year, Jalen Ramsey can cover for 5 seconds, but that other corner on the other side is going to get beat at some point because you can't get pressure on the quarterback. So for me, it starts with pressure and it still remains pressure. And I still think it is still a definitive answer.
So to me, I'm going to disagree with you guys on this one. And I think it's a really interesting discussion. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer for this because there's multiple different types of ways to win in the NFL. But to me, the thing that sets me over the edge with coverage is I kind of took it a different way than you did, Vish. I think what you said is perfect and is absolutely right. I would prefer one great edge rusher over one great corner. But I think in terms of the groups as a whole, I would prefer more good corners than a group of good pass rushers. And the reason why is that with a good group of corners, you can make up for a lackluster pass rush with the coverage you have on the back end. And with the NFL going so much more towards passing, I look at teams like the Dolphins and the Patriots are perfect examples of this. They've shown that if you can cover players in that if you can just focus on coverage as much as possible with your corners, you can be really successful and you can find different ways to get pressure. And that's the other thing too. I think that really set me over the edge because I was pretty close on this issue. I think with pressure, you can do different things to create pressure. You can get creative with it. You can use safeties, you can use linebackers, you can use corners, but I don't think there's anything that makes up for a lackluster corner play. So that's kind of where I landed with this issue. But I think you guys brought up some great points, and I could be swayed either way with this kind of thing.
So where I'll say is the 2 examples you brought up is Patriots and Dolphins. You're talking about 2 guys in Brian Flores and Bill Belichick who schematically do a phenomenal job mugging fronts and all of that and creating pressure and simulating pressure and all of that. And then in the back end, they do a really good job with pattern matching man coverages and all of that. But like you look at then a guy who's from the same system, runs the same system, and had good cover players in Detroit while running that system, but still struggled to cover people in Matt Patricia because they couldn't rush the passer. It's the same thing. I mean, Romeo Crennel, he's also struggled for years doing it. Eric Mangini, we saw with the 49ers, without a pass rush, he struggled a little bit, but then he also didn't have great corners. So it's a little twofold. But I think the one thing, if you look at if you can get pressure on the quarterback, that translates because you talked about you can't overcome that poor corner play. I'd argue you can because you're constantly playing zone coverage. And when you're playing very, very technically sound zone coverage and you know you only have to cover for 2 or 3 seconds, you can be a really, really dominant defense.
I think that's a super fair point to bring up. And I think with this discussion in whole, this is one of the more interesting topics for the next 5 years in the NFL, just to see the way that teams build through the draft and the kind of players that they value. Vish, you brought up an excellent point, which I want to get back to, which is corner. Positional value for corner. It should be one of the most valued positions in the NFL. Now, Blake, the Packers, they seem to be doing a better and better job with that, especially in the last
We have one
drafts.
guy.
Yeah, but even then,
Kevin King wasn't bad either.
No, but
Yeah.
if you look at their draft, they're trying to address that issue. They're doing things to try and get better at coverage. If you look at the 49ers on the other hand, they don't really invest in the corner position almost at all. I mean, they did this season, but even then they picked a guy at 102, and you can't really get great corners unless you get them within the first 40 picks of the draft. So I think this is a really interesting thing because on the one hand, like with the 49ers, they were able to be so successful with their pass rush in the 2019 season, especially that defensive line. It was so dominant. And then you look at a game like the Super Bowl and what happened with the Chiefs. And when you can't cover a guy like Tyreek Hill, it becomes a huge issue.
Yeah, but nobody can cover him, right? Mahomes torched the New England Patriots that you mentioned in the second half of that football game too. So, I mean, the bottom line of this discussion to me is that you need both. You need to be able to cover and you need to be able to rush the passer. It's like, would you rather have a team that can run the football, or would you rather have a team that can throw the football? Neither is winning. You need to be both. So I think it's an interesting question, though. And thank you for having us on and doing this, man. We really enjoyed doing this. You do an awesome job. Make sure you guys subscribe. Ben Meyerson is your YouTube channel.
Yep, that's it. So, yeah, just
you're doing an incredible job, Ben. Awesome. It was great to be on.
Well, thank you, Vish. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Blake, also. Just real quick, all your guys' stuff is linked in the description below. So for anyone who doesn't know who you guys are, which if they're here, I don't know why they're here then, they should go check you guys out for everything. And thank you for the kind words, Vish. Blake, anything you want to say before we get out of here, man?
Yeah, I guess I had one or two more things on the topic, but
absolutely.
With corners, like I thought the Patriots thing was a great example. With the coverage, and you always see it how, they value having good corners, Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson, and then they've also had just secondary being incredible also with Devin McCourty just being an awesome safety for, I guess it seems like the longest time, but he's really good. And what they do back there really helps them to just do whatever they can up front to create pressure, whether that's blitzing their linebackers or disguising coverages. That allows them that. And then also I wanted to bring up another team in what Don Martindale does with the Ravens, and their secondary is incredible. Obviously, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith, Humphrey, when they had Earl Thomas in 2019, and I guess their safeties haven't been completely horrible, but they struggle getting pressure. And what they would always do is they would just send the house and say, all right, guys, we're going to need you to cover for as long as you can, because if we rush 4, it's not getting home. And their defense was really good last year. And unfortunately, they weren't able to beat the Bills, but that's not the reason they lost to the Bills. They kind of shut the Bills down for the most part. The Bills got a pick 6, but Ravens defense was not the issue last year. And I think a lot of that has to do with how good their secondary was, with those 3 corners being there and being playmakers.
That's fair.
And just real quick, I think for me, the thing with corners is I just want to have as many good corners as possible on my team.
Yeah.
That's key, I think, really, in the modern NFL. So, let's get out of here, though. Vish, thank you. Again, Blake, you guys do excellent content. Everyone should go check it out. Again, if you haven't, I can't iterate this enough. Have a great weekend, everyone. And, hey, thanks, guys, for coming on my channel. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ben. You're doing awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, guys. All right, that's where I'll leave today. I'll be back Monday. Go follow me on Twitter. I'll be putting all my updates out there for who I'll have on my channel next week. I have a lot of stuff coming up. So let's get out on that. Thank you again, guys.